Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of Back to Basics. And we are back at it again. As usual, I am still Pastor Don. That hasn't changed, go figure. And joining me, as always, is the wonderful, remarkable, hale and healthy Courtney.
Hey.
Yay! So today, we are going to be picking up where we left off last time. Last time, we started in Genesis chapter 12 on the call of Abram. We talked a lot about Abram the monotheist and kind of like how that developed culturally. From here, we're going into a litany of stories about Abram and his kind of journey towards becoming Abraham. Pretty much between here and kind of the bulk of the more known Abraham stories, like we'll hit Sodom and Gomorrah at some point. We'll hit Abraham and Isaac as that comes up. Until we really get into that kind of Hagar, Isaac kind of fulfillment of the promise stuff, there's not a whole lot of new historical information to add to it. So mostly what we're going to be talking about for the next few episodes is how we understand these stories and why they're important to us spiritually and in terms of our kind of religious history. And I don't think we're going to have anything new to add in terms of like deep historical fact, at least nothing we haven't already talked about. So with that in mind, shall we get to the reading for the day?
Heck yeah.
Let's do the thing. I'll take it away. We are on Genesis chapter 12, and I am going to be starting from verse 10 here, which is where we get Abram and Sarai in Egypt. Now, Courtney, I want to invite you to listen closely. We actually did cover this on our Discord server in a devotional about a month or so ago. So this is one that we have discussed before within our community. So keep an eye on this one, because this is one that's got a couple different angles we can go on. So let's get started. Abram and Sarai in Egypt. Now there was a famine in the land. So Abram went down to Egypt to reside there as an alien, for the famine was severe in the land. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to his wife Sarai, "I know well that you are a woman beautiful in appearance. And when the Egyptians see you, they will say, 'This is his wife.' Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say you are my sister, so that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared on your account." When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. When the officials of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And for her sake, he dealt well with Abram, and he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male and female slaves, female donkeys, and camels. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this that you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say, 'She is my sister,' so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here's your wife, take her and be gone." And Pharaoh gave his men orders concerning him, and they set him on the way with his wife and all that he had. So, what up with this one?
There's always a lot to unpack with these sorts of verses.
Isn't there
I'm gonna start with the silliest one.
All right.
Male donkeys,
Mm-hmm.
male and female slaves, female donkeys.
Yeah.
What? Again, I color this a weird nit to pick, but why phrase it that way?
Not a clue. Like, I don't know if there's anything really in that phraseology, mostly because like list organization varies so wildly from language to language. Like, so ask, for example, how English orders its like adjectives, adverbs, and everything else in a sentence, and you can get an idea. I think it's just a linguistic oddity here. I wouldn't think there's anything.
It's just weird. Like, why not put the donkeys together? I was baffled by that. I needed to get that out of the way. Okay. Part of this is funny to me because Abram like knew what was up, and he was like, all right, I know how to stay alive here. So you just play along. And it worked. It did work. And I think he was probably right. Like, this worked and you got something out of it and sent on your way.
Yes and no. Like that piece you're identifying there is what I kind of call God's long plan. I think fully God intended Abram to go into Egypt and to come out of Egypt better than he was when he went in. But it was kind of up to Abram to decide which way that was going to go. And I don't think Abram chose wisely.
See, and it seemed to me like kind of, I mean, there's the whole, women as property sort of baloney that is how things were.
Well, one thing I like to call attention to in this one is the assumptions on which everybody's actions are based. So let's start by looking at Abram. He operates from a series of assumptions. I'm going into this land, and as soon as I do, them foreigners gonna steal my woman. Like right off the bat, you have an assumption that would be totally at home in Texas, or pretty much anywhere in everywhere in the United States at this point. But it's just not commented on when we read this passage at all in church. We're often looking at it through the lens of adultery. Like Pharaoh was the bad guy here because he was, getting.
Well, I don't think Pharaoh was necessarily the bad guy as things transpired here, because he didn't know.
Like, I would even put forth the argument that this is one of the examples we get of a generally good interaction with a reasonable, and I would even say kind, Pharaoh here.
Yeah, he does let him go after the fact. He doesn't just like, okay, now I'm going to kill you both.
Yeah.
So there.
He doesn't he doesn't see, oh, you never told me she was your wife, so why don't I kill you and sort out the problem precisely how you expected I was going to do at the beginning? That never happens.
Yeah.
Like, and you could argue that some of it is like Pharaoh being pragmatic and saying, well, if his God's doing this just for the stuff I didn't know, if I harm someone that works for him, he's probably not going to do any better. Like,
yeah,
there's an argument to be made there, but realistically, like in that time, having been wronged by Abram in such a way, it wouldn't be narratively out of the ordinary for Pharaoh to just say, all right, let's get my murder on. And he doesn't. Like, he not only doesn't, he lets Abram go, and there's no mention of him like reclaiming all the crap he gave Abram either.
No, it specifically says that he let him keep it, doesn't it?
Yeah, they set him on
his way with his wife and all that he had.
Like, it's like, fair cop, bro, you're on your way. That's it. And that is generous for a Pharaoh, particularly a Pharaoh in that situation. So our typical reading of this as Pharaoh is the bad guy who learns his lesson, I don't think is accurate here at all to the text.
No.
I think that yes, but there are really two bad guys in this text. And I would say that Pharaoh is one of them, but not for the reasons we suggest. I think they each, both Pharaoh and Abram, I would say, are the two bad guys here. Really, the guys in the story are bad guys. And I think it comes back to what you were saying earlier about the whole women as property angle. Because, and we will get into this as we go on, a piece that we see God echoing again and again and again and again is like equality for one, but also the importance, the absolute unviolatable importance of consent. And so neither Abram nor Pharaoh regard Sarai as a human being with the self-actualization to engage in consent.
Well, at the time, she kind of wasn't, right? I mean, like, if the Pharaoh just kind of was like, hey, I want a piece of that, did she have the right to be like, no, and keep her life?
No, but the Pharaoh had the right, and often did have the right, to not treat a woman in that way. Like, I mean, he's the Pharaoh, he can do what he wants.
Yeah.
And what we see throughout, particularly the Old Testament, is people making decisions and then reaping the reward for that. So Abram goes into this alien country as an immigrant, but we don't like to talk about that. Abram is an immigrant. Oh dear God. So he goes into this country as an immigrant looking for food, and his immediate response is to say, these filthy foreigners, they're gonna steal my lady. and he starts being duplicitous about it, and then he has Sarai lie. He creates this whole falsehood, and then when Pharaoh comes in and says, "Oh, she's your sister. I'm gonna get me some of that." At no point in here does Abram say, "Yeah, sorry, man, you called my bluff." He's like, "Yeah, okay, have at her, brother." Like, so this whole process here, Abraham's being duplicitous, but he's also not engaging Sarai's consent in the whole thing and trading her off like an object, which, like, this pops up throughout the Old Testament. Every time it does, mysteriously something seems to happen to the people who are involved in this, and we always attribute it to something else, but like, it keeps happening every time someone treats a woman as property, that God does a thing that kind of pisses off. Abraham winds up losing his wife and being put in this untenable position as a result of his decision to treat her as property. Pharaoh winds up with the plagues, again,
Yeah.
recurring theme. But both of them wind up suffering something. In Abram's case, it's exactly what he feared. He lost his wife. In Pharaoh's case, it was like a divine punishment for he knows not what. And they both suffer because they're both trading Sarai around like property. And the thing that I have always found kind of ruefully amusing about this is how Pharaoh, when he's confronted with this, he's immediately like, "Oh, it's because she's your wife." Now, that's my favorite turn. Like, he identifies that I've clearly pissed off at least one angry God. He may not realize it's the God, but like, definitely there's a divine being angry at me for something. I got to figure out what's going wrong. And the first thing he spots is, "You lied to me about the fact that she was actually your wife." Whoosh! How the focus goes off himself. Like, God's punishing me for something you did. How often do we stumble into that one? I feel like I'm
I have to
ranting.
wonder if that could possibly have been the intent at writing, though, because I mean, this doesn't read like something that was written to make us, think, "Oh, poor Sarai." I mean, that they start referring to her as the woman halfway through. Like,
Well, this is where we got to sort out two different questions. Is what was intended by the human composers of the story when putting to paper? And what was the intent of God in the narrative? Now, these are two important questions to ask, because if we're looking at this solely as a literary text, then there's no point in drawing modernly useful lessons from it, because it was written for an archaeological historical context that is no longer valid today. So screw it. We don't need it anymore. Looking at it solely literarily, it loses its usefulness. But it is part of the Bible for a reason, and that's because we can look at it and examine with more modern and evolved sensibilities. Okay, what was God actually doing in this story? What was it understood at as the time of writing is a starting point. But over the years, we've tried to understand it better. And now we're in a point, I think, historically, where we can look at this and say, okay, when they wrote this down, they were pretty sure that the issue was, oh, yeah, it was totally his wife. And Pharaoh just kind of stooped another man's wife. So there you go. But we look back on it and we look at the God present in the story, and we're like, wait, was that really what God was about in the situation? Or is this just the context they put it in when they put pen to paper? So two ways.
Pharaoh was the one who got punished, though. I mean, in this context, it doesn't really feel like Abram got punished all that much. He got exactly what he thought he was setting himself up for.
Mm-hmm.
Which was, okay, I'm alive, and it will go well for me. I'm getting all kinds of free shit. And Pharaoh is stuffing my wife. Okay. Like, he got exactly what he thought he was going to get, and he didn't get any comeuppance.
Yes and no. I would argue that comeuppance in this case isn't permanent, because the length of time that this story takes is belied by the length of the passage itself. Like, this is a story that takes place like over a long enough period of time for Abram to move through Egypt, have several major trade deals happen, have his wife be taken from him, taken to Pharaoh's place, made into one of his wives, live in the palace, have several plagues happen to Pharaoh, have Pharaoh go through the entire divination process to figure out which god and why is pissed off at him, to send out probably spies to figure out, okay, maybe it has something to do with Abram, who I took it from, to figure it out, because he finds out, but like he doesn't find out because Abram tells him, he finds out on his own. Like there's a
Yeah, he figures it out.
whole huge chunk of time in which this story takes place. It's not just an immediate thing. So the comeuppance that Abram is experiencing during this period is, we have an indeterminate, but probably not so short period of time in which Abram, who addresses right at the beginning that his primary fear is losing his wife. Like, I know well you're a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they'll say this is his wife, they'll kill me, they'll let you live, and they'll take you. That's what I don't want to happen. So he's in fear for his life as part of this process. He's worrisome about losing his wife, and that happens. Like, you know, he may have viewed his wife as property, but that doesn't belie the affection related to it. He's operating out of a place of fear, and that fear and anxiety.
See, and I'm having difficulty reading that in there. All I'm really seeing is that he, he says they will say this is his wife, then they will kill me, but they will let you live.
Mm-hmm.
That seems like fearing for his life more than his wife.
It's a fair point. But again, even if you dismiss the fearing for his wife aspect, which I don't, because we see throughout the remainder of Abram and Abraham's story that there is an affection between him and his wife.
Yeah, definitely.
So we know that exists. Like that's something we're getting from later, but we know it's there. So I think that is reading into the text a little bit. You're right, but I think it's a fair read into the text.
Fair enough.
But like, even setting that aside, yeah, they took his wife, but I would still, in his situation, be afraid, okay, well, I no longer have anything to negotiate with them. What's to stop them from just killing me and taking back all their stuff? What's to stop them? Like, I no longer have a beautiful wife to negotiate with. What's going to happen next? What's going to happen when I leave Egyptian territory? Am I going to be able to get the wife back? Like, I try not to at least discount emotional suffering in these cases, particularly like anxiety and stress, because those don't come through the text to us at all modernly. There's never any real depictions of them, because honestly, mental health wasn't a thing back in those days. But I imagine, and I read from this, Abram living in this period in Egypt in kind of a perpetual anxiety.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And
well, the fear of being found out at the very least.
Exactly. And so that whole piece of it is Abram's plague, I think. Is it as severe as what Pharaoh gets? No. Are we going to argue whether severity of punishment equates to severity of crime? No, because that's not necessarily how it works. And again, it goes back to what I said at the beginning, that I fully believe Abram entering into Egypt and leaving with more than he had, in a better position to fulfill the covenant that God has made with him. I think that was the plan all along. And I think what we're looking at, so looking at where Abram ends the story is not always the best boat, because it was always going to end that way, because that's a necessary component of God's plan. But looking at how Abram screws it up along the way is, I think, what's important here.
Alrighty. Well, do we have anything else to discuss in this particular passage?
No, I think, a fat fistful of misogyny is pretty much just where we go with this passage.
Yeah.
Yeah, not much to say about that. But I do think it is important for us to look at this with more modern eyes and say, yeah, there's multiple layers of misogyny here that we may not have been able to recognize even 100 years ago, but we really can recognize today.
The misogyny onion.
Well, the thing is, you say that as a joke, but a lot of the Bible really does work that way, whether it's misogyny, racism, or other things. It's like what we believed about this 100 years, 1,000 years ago, what have you, changes over time, because as we grow as a race, as a species, we become more able to look at the nuance of what God's doing in a particular story, and we understand more and we understand better. And that's really, I think, what happens with this text.
Maybe that kind of gives a different perspective to the whole, living word
Yeah.
sort of concept that I've gotten in like more traditional churches about like, the word of the Lord it's as valid today as when it was written and all that. But it's in different ways, because as we grow, it's the sort of text that grows with us,
Yes.
because we're able to get new things for different times out of it.
And that's something I really, really often call attention to, is the idea of the word as a living word is a core fundamental Christian belief. But particularly in American churches, in evangelical churches, I say churches in a fairly light sense there, the idea of the living word has kind of mutated into the stagnant word, which is always applicable, if you understand that. So like in a lot of very conservative churches, we have this, the idea that the Bible is a fixed point, and that as humans change, we move away from it. But that's not a living word. That's a fixed word, which isn't apt to how Christianity holds the Bible. We hold it to be a living word that evolves and develops with us, that as we grow, we see more and we mature, and the Bible matures and grows with us because we can see it better and more clearly. So there's a bit of a common heresy that's grown in the American churches around how the Bible is viewed. And that's something that, like, literally, that's why the series is called Back to Basics, is because we're going back to revisit that.
This is a hell of a moment, because I've genuinely never considered it like that before. Because a lot of this has partly been I can't pronounce the words for the life of me, but you had said something on the Discord recently about either that or on the Facebook page about exegesis
and eisegesis.
Yeah. And I'm sitting there and I'm reading that and I'm like, are we doing the wrong one of those? Because like, I'm sitting there and I'm like, we've read the word of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, like without any, splitting hairs, I think it's pretty evident how Jesus wanted us to live our lives and the sort of philosophies that Jesus would like to see us adhering to.
Mm.
I'm like, are we going back and like reorganizing the way that we read the Old Testament so that it lines up with a modern understanding of Christ's will for our lives?
And I think that's a fair question.
It's not that, is it? It's that
No.
we're absorbing knowledge from the word because we've opened our hearts to how Christ wants us to live our lives.
Exactly. And I think this is a differentiation that, first off, the fact that we keep asking that question is a huge indicator of where we fall off that. Like most people who are doing an eisegetical approach to scripture don't ask themselves, am I doing an eisegesis now? No, they just are like, hey, it supports my worldview. Instead, the way I would draw the line is someone who does an eisegetical approach, before they read the scripture, they say, this is what I expect to find. What we're doing is we're reading scripture and asking what we're seeing and allowing it to interact with ourselves, our understanding, and our knowledge about the world, and seeing how that grows and blossoms within us. That's not eisegesis, that's exegesis, but it's a growing and maturing exegesis. That's my position anyway, but what do I know?
Well, I'm glad we keep asking questions too, and we've been told by the Bible to do as much. Faith like a child.
Exactly.
When I was younger, ironically, I thought that was supposed to be just, complete and, unquestioning, I know mom and dad are going to be there, that sort of thing. Cause I had a pretty comfortable little family, but, like having a kid and no, faith like a child is why? No.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to. Why?
I would even throw a wrench onto your original statement too, as like, faith like a child, having that just blind faith that mommy and daddy will always be there. I'd have to say, like, probably about like a couple of times a month, at least one, both, or all of my children will come up to me and say, Daddy, what happens if you and mommy die? Where do we get to go then? Like, they wrestle with questions of mortality and impermanence and things like that, and they don't take anything for granted. Like, and that's not a bad thing. Like, that gives them a chance to learn about that. For me as the father to sit down and say, all right, well, one, not bloody likely, but two, if the unlikely happens, there's a plan for that. You're taken care of, which is literally Jesus' whole afterlife message. Look, don't worry about it now. It's not a big deal. It's not something you're going to have to worry about for a while. But when you do, I got you covered, man. You're good. Don't worry about it. Anyway, we're getting off track into more esoteric theology, which is kind of what we do. But I think this is kind of a good place for us to stop for today. And we will.
Thanks for talking about it anyway, though. Like, having that sort of realization, I was like, holy shit.
Yeah,
like big spiritual realization. So thank you for talking about that.
That's what these things
a little
are
bit of a
for.
flashback to our old series where, I just was a ragged open wound and we prodded it together.
Hey, you're not reading the Bible if you're not having dramatic realizations from time to time. That's kind of my point.
Yeah.
So
kind of what religion do.
Speaking of dramatic realizations, I know that every single week, Courtney, you have a wonderfully dramatic realization about what everyone watching this video should do.
That they should like, share, and subscribe.
That's the one. Yes, every week. Same realization. I feel the same way.
And after one of the conversations in the Discord, by the way, join the Discord. Like,
yes, definitely
that's not
that.
like, share, and subscribe. That's just like, maybe check out the Discord. You can leave the channel if you decide it's not for you.
Yeah.
Just check us out. But now I've lost my train of thought. This always happens. ADD.
Yeah.
No.
We're talking about like, share, and subscribe.
Good. Oh, I just get this mental image somehow of like below the video bar on the YouTube page, just tiny Jesus comes in and just like flips the like button. Just like, no!
I gotta get better at animation. Now I want to make that.
Please do. I like, it started out funny and now I already hate the like, share, and subscribe thing, but like, please do it. We're all
it really does
under the
help.
thumb of a stupid algorithm, and it gets eyes on the product.
I'll tell you what, I'm not going to put a number on it yet, because you know what, who knows what would be an appropriate number for this. But if enough people like and subscribe to the channel, maybe we'll get an animator to animate Jesus flipping the like button. Like, I think that's something we can do. We got a high enough number of subscribers on this thing. We will get an animated Jesus flipping the like button. And you know what?
Maybe whipping the subscribe button.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking like we'll get a little animation, like a repeating kind of like 8-bit animation of Jesus just sitting in the corner, kind of braiding his whip of cords, and then at the very end he'll just whip that like button on cue. Oh, we're a fun people, aren't we?
We need Bible study. We're going to hell. Anyway, thanks for tuning in. If you stuck around through all of this, all the way to the end of the video, I understand that's something that's supposed to be good for the almighty algorithm. Yeah, and if you don't stay to the end of the video, how will you catch up on all the craziness that we're going to get involved in? But no, seriously, like she said, join the Discord server. That's where most of the craziness and all the fun events and stuff are happening. We're scheming. It is fun. Interesting things. If you are local to Japan, which is where our physical church is, check that out on the website. We're going to be doing more there over the next couple of months as well. But most importantly, have a good week, and we will see you in the next episode. Bye, y'all. Bye.